एक मिनट ना, आप मेरा ये चाय पकड़ लो। आगे आ जाओ बेटा, आगे बैठो इधर। सत श्री अकाल जी। फ्रंट लाइन पे आ जाओ बच्चे। Welcome, Professor Gill, and our friend Navyug. Welcome.
Thank you, Ji.
Well, sorry we were late by a few minutes. Mrs. Gill. We also welcome Mrs. Gill.
सत श्री अकाल जी, सत श्री अकाल साਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ।
Good. ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਗਏ। Good, good.
सेम हियर, मैंने बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है जी ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਨਾਲ।
अच्छा बुला लो, प्रिंसिपल साहब इतना आ जाए। Just 2 minutes, you know what, are going to be there. My apologies for being a little late. Because it is raining here in Delhi. It's snowing in US, but they managed to join. Great people, isn't it? Pursuit. Karam आ गई। छोड़ी छोड़ी बेटे, छोड़ी छोड़ दो। Jatinder, please. So can we start with the permission of the chair, Sucha Singh Gill? शुरू करिए जी। सुन नहीं रहा? देखना बेटे, हाँ मेरी प्रॉब्लम सुन रहा जी?
हाँ जी, थोड़ी आवाज तो आ रही है सन।
हाँ जी, थोड़ी भी आ रही है।
हाँ जी सर।
Please unmute yourself, Professor Gill.
Yes, yes, I have unmuted. Now you can hear me.
बेटे इधर कुछ
उनके बाद
अमर जी ਅਸੀਂ ਸੁਚਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਗਿੱਲ ਨੋਟ ਕਰ ਦਾਂਗੇ। Professor Sood is asking about the format. I said let us be a little informal because the panelists are members of Sadan's extended family and one new member we admit, that is the author, Navyug Gill. He is longing to come back to Punjab, so we admit him as part of our Punjab Institute. Now, I have to be brief because I know nothing about the topic and the book. We're sitting here right, place called Bhai Veer Singh Sahit Sadan, which was built to perpetuate the memory of Bhai Veer Singh, great Punjabi poet. And under the long 25 years patronage of Dr. Manmohan Singh and guidance of eminent scholars, it has emerged as a first-rate center of study in Punjabi language, literature, and culture. In the 80s, it was felt that research on Punjab is not possible in an objective manner because of disturbed conditions, and initiative was taken by Professor Amrik Singh, Professor Bipin Chandra, Professor Garewal, and others. So we set up this Institute of Punjab Studies. Now, apart from major seminars and conferences, we organize two functions every month, a lecture and discussion on a good book. And Yadindra Singh is in charge of our book discussion program. We all felt that this month's best book was the book we're discussing, Labors of Division, Global Capitalism, and Emergence of Peasants in Colonial Panjab. For a little difficulty, I was keen that Professor Sucha Singh Gill, the right man, should chair the panel. There was time difference, but we managed. And then I requested our young friend to send the book, Navyug. But before that, Professor Gill says, I've already purchased, I'm reading the book. So I'm thankful to you. I will have panelists, Professor Sood, who's an old friend. He participated in the last seminar on Punjab in Indian Center. And Karamjit Malhotra is an old friend of the Sadan and the Institute. I'm glad they joined. And with our young scholars' effort, we have managed to involve students from the universities, and we all welcome them. Now, I think I should say a few words about Sucha Singh Gill, then hand it over to him, and he'll introduce the two panelists. I think you agree with me, Professor Gill needs no introduction. I know him since the days when we were in Punjabi University, Patala, an activist with a difference, not destructive, positive activist. Well-known economist, fine, but he's concerned about other issues of Punjab, and we regularly read his columns in the Tribune and other papers. I'm glad he's maintaining his, even he has gone to Canada, he's maintaining his contact alive with his Matrabhumi, whatever you call it. And similarly, the author, in one of his emails, says, Mera Punjab aanu bada jee karda. He's also rooted with his Punjab. Professor Gill was professor, dean, had so many things, and members of many commission, then director of the Center for Industrial and Rural Development, then director general, and then he decided to move to Canada. I've been hoping and praying he comes back, the reverse migration, and guides us. But I'm glad when he was in Canada, he was equally valued, consulted by the Canadian government, and asked to give them advice on various issues. So we will feel very proud. Now, with these little small introductions, I'll hand it over to Professor Gill, who will introduce the two panelists and then divide the time. After the two panelists, I will request the author to share his thoughts. And if you all permit, we can have some questions, if any. So with this, my job is over. Thank you very much. Welcome again.
Thank you, Professor Mahendra Singh, for kind words. You are doing a great job organizing discussions, and today's themes very, very important. And I find that the book is very interesting and very comprehensive. Navyug has done a lot of labor, consulted a lot of literature, interacted with large number of scholars, and he has produced a book with a new perspective. And the discussion on this book can open up many research questions and also help us to understand in what way the British colonialists, after annexing Punjab in 1849, tried to reshape the economy, especially the rural economy of the Punjab. And author has a very interesting perspective that they created a special kind of peasantry. And while dealing with this issue, he dabbles into debate between Lenin and Kautsky, and he makes a lot of references to Karl Marx, Adam Smith, and apart from writing history, he is trying to look at the way the world is shaped by the global forces, especially in the 20th century, early 20th century, and ultimately at the time of independence we get a economy which has a definite shape, and then it is related to the future of the Punjab state after the partition. And we have some data which can be used to relate it to what Navyug has said, because earlier period we did not have NSSO data for 1953-1954. We find elaborate NSSO data on land relations, how much land was under Bhai system, how much land was under tendency, and how much land was being self-cultivated. So these are some of the things which matter a lot. I don't want to take much time, because though I have read the book, but I will like to be benefited by the two distinguished panelists who has read the book, and they will like to make their comments. And I wish that if they can complete between 20 to 25 minutes at the most, and then Navyug will speak, and after that we can have some questions from the audience before I give my remarks later on. At this moment, I would like to invite Professor Atul Sood, who is a very well known economist, and I have the privilege to know him for many years. He is at present Professor of Economics at Center for Regional Study, JNU, New Delhi, where he has been teaching since 2001. His research interests are centered around political economy of development, with particular focus on regional inequalities and structural changes in the Indian economy, and the impact on state level policies on social welfare. He is the author of an influential book, Poverty Amidst Prosperity, Essays on Trajectory of Development in Gujarat, Akar publication 2012, which provides a critical evaluation of growth models through lens of social justice and equity. A significant contribution to national digital initiatives has been made by Professor Sood, and he has developed a specialized module for EPG Pathshala in economics, addressing a complex themes such as economic planning and agrarian change. Apart from a profound scholar who has done a very important work on the Indian economy, he is committed to the values of democracy, democracy, equality, and the rights of the oppressed section of the society. With these words, I would like to invite Professor Atul Sood to make his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Sucha Singh Gill, for your kind words. And thank you for inviting me here to come and speak on this fascinating book. I have not met Navyug, but I think I know him pretty well after having spent a couple of days reading his book multiple times. At least I know his thought process well, I would say. And I'm extremely pleased that I've been asked actually to engage with this book. And as I will speak today, it will become clear why what's a good reason why I wanted to be engaged with this book. And the opportunity to speak here today provided me that chance to engage with it more thoroughly. I'll take, as I said, I've been asked 20-25 minutes, so I'll keep track of time. Let me first begin with a sort of qualifying remark, Navyug, that as I speak today and as I make my observations about this book, forgive me for sort of saying things which might sound as a simplified, a more popular version of your own text. In a sense, you might hear yourself in some ways, maybe a poorer version of the same, as I speak today about this book. And there are a couple of reasons why I say this at the outset. Because as I read the book, I found myself often in agreement with the book. So that's the one reason that I'm saying that, I might be speaking exactly what the book is arguing. I'm also inclined to do so because I'm truly impressed by the rigor of this book. I'm not known for, very sort of, being very flowery in my, appreciation of people, but I really sincerely mean that I'm really impressed by the rigor of the writing of this book, the rich and extensive use of research material. And more importantly, the reason why I think that we need to engage with this book and the arguments of this book at a more sort of, general level and in a more engaged manner is because I share the perspective with the author in terms of the concerns that motivated him to write this book. And that is to understand, and I quote him, to understand the present so as to create spaces to think of different possibilities for an emancipatory future. And I think this sums up the book. And as I end my conversation today, I will sort of raise many, so to say, controversial points that emerge for the emancipatory politics as we engage with the future of the state of Punjab and the larger future of this country. That is going to be the inevitable sort of concluding part of what I say today. So as I said, I want to be excused, Navyug, if you hear more of yourself as I summarize your book and as I make a couple of observations. I am also very conscious now as I sort of look at this hall, that there are very many young scholars here. So in some sense, we'll like to keep the conversation at a level where everyone can engage with it and maybe a more sort of polemical engagement with other issues of theory and so on and so forth can wait for a later day conversation or maybe in the later part of the conversation today. So let me begin by simply putting that book Labors of Division by Navyug Gill is about the history of labor, caste and capital in colonial Punjab. So it's a book on history. At the same time, the book is of immense, as Professor Sucha Singh Gill said, immense contemporary relevance. And that to me is the outstanding and the most unique part of this book. There's a book in history, extensively engaged with methods of history writing. And yet at the same time, as you read the book, you will constantly be able to think about the contemporary issues. And obviously, as you engage, you'll formulate your own opinions of what you think about the book and the arguments that the book makes. The second strength of the book is that as it engages with the history of colonial Punjab, and as I said, the history of labor, caste, and capital in colonial Punjab, it does not lose sight of the larger theoretical framework with which it wants to engage. And I'll come to that in a minute. So two things go simultaneously as the history is revealed, or as the history is read, or as the history is constructed. A, the linkages with the contemporary world and the contemporary Punjab, and B, the implicit and sometimes more explicit conceptual theoretical debates, particularly that deal with the larger question of agrarian transition. So the two go along as you read different chapters and different parts of the text. One can sort of summarize the book, and one can talk about the book and frame the book in different ways. What I'm going to do is to keep two center points or two pillars of my conversation for making my observations today. One, I want to which are my key takeaways from the book in a sense. One is the reading of the history of Punjab and its implications for debates within Marxist political economy and post-colonial theory. Okay, so that's one sort of component. And the second, of course, is the reading of the specific history of Punjab and its implications for understanding and perhaps building resistance in contemporary Punjab within the Marxist political economy framework. So the first one where I see these implications for debates within Marxist political economy and post-colonial theory. And in the second part, or the second aspect, it's more about the specific history of Punjab and its implications for understanding and building resistance in contemporary Punjab within Marxist political economy framework. That to me are the two sort of pegs around which I have reread the book, so to say, after having read it once. First, some general observations about the book. The author wants us really to think about addressing the challenges of contemporary Punjab and contemporary India without freezing our minds with any fixed notion of trans-historic peasant, nor its demise in some preordained future. So there are two aspects to it. So neither we carry forward some fixed trans-historic. So basically, for young students, this has been an significant question if you want to understand today, that how do you look at the changes that are going on in different parts of India, particularly rural India, in which Punjab becomes a very significant factor for very many reasons, apart from its specific history. Also because in the larger question of transition in India, Punjab being a green revolution state and the history of it becomes very significant how we develop its understanding. And if in terms of building a future, in terms of making alliances, how do you make the rural-urban linkages? How do you make, create common social movements between those who are deprived and marginalized in the rural areas with those who are deprived and marginalized in the non-rural or urban areas. So the larger questions of what kind of alliances you make, when I say alliances, what kind of issues you should go with to the people. In other words, how do you create the political process that builds a better society? That remains a fundamental question. And once you engage with that question, you'll have to engage with saying what's happening within the world that we are looking at, in this case, contemporary Punjab, and in that sense, the history of Punjab. So this larger question, theoretically, this is a question of how do you look at the agrarian transition? How did we move from agriculture to, so to say, non-agriculture? If there are students of economics, the discipline of economics is overburdened with the concept of structural transformation. So we are all expected that we would, we meaning all nation states, are expected to replicate the experience of the advanced capitalist countries, in a sense, move from agriculture to industry to service. You must have heard all of this. So there's, the usual, trajectory of growth and development that you would expect. For what reasons we are following it, for what reasons we are not following it, what are the key reasons of those differences? Are these differences for good or are these differences for bad? How do we, take the reality as we understand it today and take it to creating a better world? These are all questions that the book helps us deal with. And that's why I said the thematic concern of the book is of immense significance, depending on what you want to look at and what you want to draw out of it. So it's a book about history, but as I said, constantly engaging us, telling us to look at about how do you deal with, how do you understand contemporary Punjab. So at one level, as I said, it sort of discourages us, or it asks us, not to freeze our minds with any fixed notion of a trans-historic peasant or a trans-historic, a fixed pattern of change. Nor it is telling us that, we should expect that over time, something expected will happen, which will be an overlap of, perhaps in quotation mark, supposedly the experience of the Western European countries, or supposedly the experience of, specifically maybe England. So, in neither we should be burdened by saying what happened there. If that is not happening here, are we backward? Are we disadvantaged? Have we lost out in the larger building up of a more modern economy, state, and so on and so forth? Or in that sense, whatever we have, is it an obstacle for a transition to what other countries had achieved? That would be sort of, one. And the other would be that, if we are not, in which direction are we going? Are we just waiting for that process to be unleashed here? In other words, are we waiting that, in some ways in the agrarian question, do we expect that the peasant to be, to dissolve, to wither away in some sense, and some other kind of economic relations between those who cultivate and those who don't cultivate, which is the key activity of any rural economy? Some other kinds of social relations, we are expecting them to evolve. And therefore, the kind of demands that we will make and the kind of movements that we will support will have all very organic linkage with how we understand this transition and these questions. The book says that, Punjab fields are plowed, crops grown, grain harvested for hundreds of years without any fixed notion of the peasant. And therefore, the specific emergence of a Punjabi peasant does not mean it is similar to the worldwide transhistoric peasantry. Since the origins are different, so is the future going to be different. This is exactly what I just summarized, saying that if you want to look at the larger question, then this is the issue. The second aspect that I want to also highlight is that, as I said earlier, the book is rigorous, it's evidence-based, and I must say, extremely well written, nearly poetic at some points to read. The key strength of the book for me is that when it deals with this detailed archival material, the book never loses track to connect with the contemporary, as I said earlier, nor the key theoretical constructs that it wants to challenge. Usually, books that are based on archival material, they get lost in footnotes. But, it's very hard to sort of keep track of the core argument and you have to keep going back. But this kind of challenge I did not face as I read the book. So really appreciate the strength of writing of the author. The book is about expectations and operations of capital in the colonial world. By studying the political economy of colonial Punjab, the book tells us that capitalism does not produce uniformity across the globe, which I just simply put to say that, most of the ex-colonial countries came into independence around, mid-1940s or 1950s. And there was this, emergence of a whole discipline of what is called as development economics, development theory. All of you must have, if you, engage with the subject of economics, would have engaged. And the overarching influence in this field was that it is a matter of time that the developing countries are going to catch up, so to say, with the advanced capitalist countries. And the only mechanism that could happen is if they replicate the experience of the developed countries in some ways. In other words, in the mainstream economic theory, this is put as more structural transformation. And of course, in Marxist political economy, there are a separate set of issues that emerge in the larger question of how capitalism has evolved. And are there certain specific issues of what we call as colonial capitalism, third world capitalism, and so on and so forth? Or is it that, the third world and the developing economies will go through a process which will be just a replication of the emergence and evolution of capitalism in the advanced capitalist countries? Now, the question is, how does the book do that? They do this. I mean, what I have said is the book does all this, but how does it do it? The book examines the peculiar history of so there are many things the book does. One of the things that book begins with is to examine the peculiar history of the land revenue settlement in the mid-19th century Punjab. And the author establishes how British officials used the idioms of caste, tribe, and religion to identify certain groups as peasants, giving them exclusive ownership of parcels of land, along with the responsibility to pay taxes in cash to the state. This inaugurated a new form of accumulation distinct from the standard narrative of Western Europe, says Gill. Now, this is fundamental to the book or to the story of the book. So again, in a simplified manner, when the Britishers came, they had already introduced certain land changes in the land relations. They privatized the ownership of land. And then there was a question of Gill's book brings a lot of details about it. Then there is a whole history that once they wanted certain revenue and rent from the land, then there's a large issue of indebtedness. In other words, those who were the cultivating people at that point of time could not meet the revenue demands of the British or the colonial regime. And the book, in great detail with all the archival material, and I'm very consciously simplifying it so that it's accessible to this young audience that is here in this hall, that the book looks at that. What do the British do? What do the British do to deal with this mobilization of revenue? They wanted their taxes, but how do they get their taxes? And they build a whole very detailed structure of dealing with how they want to get their taxes and what all they do, who will pay the taxes, how the taxes will be collected, who has the entitlement to the ownership of land. So it's all about the different studies, different reports, different observations that British officials make over a period of time that the book uses in order to establish how did the British look at that period of what was happening in agriculture. That's how the archival material is used. And it is in that sense that, it talks about, the Punjab Land Annihilation Act, who would be able to own land, who would be able to sell land, who can be separated from land. If who is separated, then who's be entitled to take over the land? When should the government or the judiciary of that point of time intervene to say that, this is too much of too much of rent, should smoothen the negative impacts of indebtedness, and so on and so forth. So basically, the book looks at all the processes that the Britishers introduced to deal with this question. But one of the fundamental questions that while dealing with this, the Navyug raises is about how is the colonial regime going to be seeking legitimacy for what it is doing? It is doing for the purposes it wants to do. It has its own goals. It has its own requirements. It's a colonial empire. It has to accumulate capital for the larger process of the sustenance of the colonial regime, which has its headquarters somewhere else. It's an imperial power. So the framing, and it's a very interesting discussion in the book, that the framing of this whole issue of indebtedness, collection of revenue, ownership of land, etc., is done in a framework where the colonial regime wants to communicate this impression that it is very benevolent to its subjects. In other words, it is doing all this for the benefits of the subjects with whom they are dealing with. Which is to say that, the peasantry has, certain traits which are not good. They spend too much money. They are not frugal. They are wasteful in their expenditure. And the reason they spend too much on their weddings, etc., etc. So they spend on areas which are not the appropriate areas. So in other words, the colonial regime creates a storytelling, a narrative, such that the reason for the crisis in agrarian Punjab is seen more as a failure of the peasantry which is engaged in the process of cultivation rather than the extraction of surplus and the engagement of Punjab economy in the larger colonial empire. So the agrarian crisis is not linked with the structural crisis of agriculture, of the economy at that point of time, but the attribution is made to the behavior of people, the values of people, the culture of people, the history of people, the ethics of people, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, there is this moral evaluation by the colonialist to look at the native and tell them that, we are doing something for your good. And for your good, you will have to go through this. And in the process, as they do this, they bring about the changes which furthers their goal. And they do this by deciding who will own land. When they decide who will own land and who are the agricultural tribes, obviously, given the reality, they use caste, they use religion. So they use different kinds of identities in order to, so it's in a sense, if you have to say it more seriously, they produce some kind of differentiation in Punjab, in the agrarian Punjab, which did not exist when the Britishers had come into being. And this differentiation that they created in the agrarian Punjab was based on these multiple identities that I'm talking about. And Gill's book makes a very serious and a very sort of comprehensive narrative around this. So multiplicity of evidence is used to establish, and I quote, where the colonial regime establishes its own operation to conceal the disrupting and reconfiguring of the relationship between caste identity, labor activity, and land ownership. So three things are key. And please remember, caste identity, labor activity, and land ownership. And it is this engagement and re-engagement with these three in a framework where the legitimacy of the colonial regime continues. In fact, not only the legitimacy continues, but they are seen as the benevolent. In economics, there is this concept of the benevolent dictator. The colonial regime obviously didn't want to project themselves as that, but that's the implication of the process through which they were governing. As this process happens, Navyug notices that this is in a way substantially different than what the literature suggests may have happened in other parts as capitalism evolved in, say, Western Europe. So because once this differentiation started taking place, in simple English, there were some who were entitled to own land, but there was a large chunk, which now constitutes roughly 1/3 population of Punjab, essentially the Dalits, who did not have now the entitlement and access to land. The way the Britishers had constructed the whole discourse around the Land Alienation Act and how they implemented the legislative framework over a period of time in in Punjab. So what Gill notices and what observes is that as this process happens, the peasants were entrenched rather than separated from their village. So in other words, since some people who were now become, as a social group, now had been entitled to own land because the British thought that they had the propensity, better cultural traits, whatever you want to say, to cultivate. And they had created this image, the notion that, there is this, the Jat Sikh peasant, or, this idea of a Jat Sikh peasantry, which often there are many stereotypes with which we associate them today, actually has been constructed in colonial Punjab. And that's what, Navyug's book tells you what kind of, stereotypes are constructed for, the peasantry of that point of time. So the peasants were entrenched rather than separated from their villages, engaging in new technologies of cultivation under colonialism while becoming dominant over other groups relegated to the status of landless laborers. So two things. A, they're getting entrenched. While in England, what was happening was that when capitalism was evolving, what was happening was the peasantry was losing land and they were being pushed out. So there was some kind of dispossession. Okay, or what is in terms of so depeasantization, proletarianization, many other processes. In other words, the linkage with land was broken. Well, because if capitalism involved this factories and production, it involved creating a large class of people who did not own any means of production, and in this case, the key means of production in England in the history was land. So there was a large dispossession or taking away of land and making them just people who can only sell their labor in the market. Now, what Navyug is saying is that look at Punjab. What is happening is that the peasant, there's a section of the population which is in a way getting pulled back, which is getting embedded or re-embedded in the rural and the agrarian. While there is, of course, a section which is now not possessing land. So two things, as I said, happens. One, there is this entrenchment of the peasantry, while there is at the same time, because there are large people who do not own land, they also need this control over these other groups, the Dalits, the landless, and so on and so forth. So their dominance is also established, large section of population who are reduced to the status of the landed laborers. And there's a very interesting discussion, I don't have the time, a longish discussion in the book about the Siri and how this whole common notion in Punjab that caste has got operationalized in Punjab, differently. Obviously, the Punjab doesn't have, the chua-choo, the that aspect too much because of the history of the Sikh religion and so on and so forth. And a fascinating discussion in Navyug's book. But what he concludes is more interesting. This part we know. What he concludes is that irrespective of whether the land cultivator and the landless were sharing every space and every activity together. But when it came to the share of the produce, who will get how much of the output, that share of the produce was not decided by any notion of equality or brotherhood or anything else. That notion was decided by the hard economic material logic of the time. And that hard economic material logic meant that it had the peasantry or the cultivating households of that point of time had to extract maximum surplus. So the landless share, or those who's the Siri, gets a very small part of the share. So two processes are happening. Some sections are getting embedded in, but there is a large section who on the basis of their social identity, who happen to be, whether you belong to being a Muslim, Sikh, or a Hindu, the lower caste or the lower spectrum of amongst all these religions, what mattered then when it came down to who will get how much share in the total produce, that none of these identities matter. For everything else, the identity may matter. We may highlight the differences Punjab has with other parts of the state, and that's where I think that I find the book on a more sort of theoretical level. At one level, it belongs to the post-colonial school in a sense, because it's recognizing the difference of the colonial state from the experience of the Western European countries. But at the same time, it also roots itself in Marxist political economy in a very serious manner, because it does not deny the significance of the, if I were to put it more bluntly, the significance of the class relations at that point of time, the material conditions that existed at that point of time. And he quotes, theoretically, a lot of things. He quotes Marx on the Jewish question and so on and so forth. This is not the matter of focus as of now in a simplified conversation. But the bottom line of that is very interesting. The bottom line is that even though you might achieve some sense of equality amongst castes in the social framework, and he talks about this whole history of Ad Dharm in Punjab, so Ambedkar talked about either enter the temples or leave Hinduism, and in Punjab, which preceded Ambedkar's call, the people are already moving out and creating their own group, sect, or a religion, which is distinct from the oppressive, the Hindu caste structure. Irrespective of all that, emergence of all that, the change in the material conditions of the Dalit does not happen because of that. And this is very significant for contemporary Punjab, because when you raise the questions of how, you had this famous farmers movement, when you mobilize the peasantry, when you want the rural Punjab to become more equal, to benefit everyone, how do you bring about the concerns of this 1/3 of the population? And just by saying that there is no Chhuachut in Punjab would not address the material inequality that exists in Punjab. In other words, the question of land becomes the fundamental question of Punjab, even if as we read the question of the colonial history and the specificity of the colonial state in Punjab. So the larger argument has linkages all over. The other theoretical debate that's linked with this narrative that Gill has produced is that there are a lot of, within the Marxist political economy, again, I'm not being polemical here, but there are a lot of scholars who have interpreted the relative power of the Punjabi peasant as the sign of the persistence of semi-feudalism or an incomplete transition to capitalism. So that's another debate, that, if we did not produce the kind of economic relations that the Western Europe produced, then we don't have capitalism. We have some other version. And there are not a lot of nomenclature that goes with it, but common nomenclature at one point of time. If you are young students and if you were students of history and economics, there was also a very serious and a longish debate called the mode of production debate in Indian agriculture, which tried to characterize what was the nature of agrarian relations in India, in Punjab in particular. And it characterized that said these were semi-feudal relations. In other words, they were pre-capitalist in some form. And Navyug is arguing, out and upfront, and I think it's quite brave on his part to argue this, because those who belong to the alternative politics in India today, there are very few of those political forces who take this political position. Most of the people who take they might be fighting for the peasants, but their implicit theoretical position is about that they are still waiting for that transition to happen. They're still waiting for this semi-feudal relations to break, in other words, for capitalism to emerge. And Navyug is outright in his argument that capitalism is there in Punjab. It is a specific kind of capitalism that the colonial state has produced in Punjab. It has already created this differentiation, some who own the land, some who don't own the land. This differentiation has a history in caste, religion, and the local culture of Punjab. And that is how the economic relations have already changed. So if we want to move forward, we have to engage with these economic relations rather than hope that they will either, it's a matter of time that they will die down, and therefore, we have to wait for its sort of, overcoming them, or that's an incomplete transition. So let us support modernization. This is the other school. I'm guilty of it in the sense people in my discipline in economics are overburdened with this argument. This is a common argument that a lot of people in Punjab and outside, that they're waiting for the process of modernization to happen in agriculture, and therefore are hand in glove, or in sense supportive of the Indian state for its processes of modernization. Because the argument being, they're concerned about the the marginalization, they're concerned about the betterment, but the theoretical position is that unless the process of modernization gets completed, the future cannot be built. So irrespective, one, those who believe in modernization, that's what the government of India's argument will be for farm laws, that we are trying to modernize agriculture. Modernization is a step towards freeing agriculture from the clutches of whatever, the previous burdens of, inequality, exploitation, and backwardness. So in a sense, modernization is one rasta, one method through which you could, it is a common discourse. And the other, of course, is that it's an obstacle. The semi-feudal relations are obstacle. We have to wait for its complete transition. So in a sense, there is an overlap with those who are resisting the contemporary, whatever, politics or contemporary development discourse, and those who are part of the contemporary development discourse. Both belong in a serious way to the modernization paradigm, and which is to say that this transition, the experience of Punjab has to replicate in the long run the experience of the of Western Europe. Again, I mean, I have to be very conscious of time. It's already near. Oh my God. Okay. So I'll skip this. The history, so one is about this land alienation, the emergence of the peasant. There's a lot of discussion in chapter 2 about, how this identity of the peasant gets created, what is the history, what were the words with which the, cultivating tribes were looked at, or cultivating people were looked at, and how this so-called peasant, which is a modern peasant for Navyug, emerges. The other part of the book, as I said, which I highlighted, is this whole question of caste and class, which I just mentioned in a very brief. Much more can be said about it. So saying that how the overlap between caste and class is constructed in Punjab, and we need to engage with it. The chapter 3 is about the different mechanisms through which the peasant debt and the solutions that the colonial state finds to address it. It's part of the construction of the peasant and the other in Punjab. I'm just rushing through and not elaborating on. I already said the fourth point, which was about this whole caste and class and lower caste. The only observation that I will make is that, and I need to underline this. I'm reading from here. Lower caste might emancipate themselves in one sense by abandoning a faith that stigmatized them as inferior and impure. So you could move out of Hinduism, you could move out and create your own. They might also enact this rejection openly, as Ambedkar eventually ceased to seek entry into Hindu temples, and Ad Dharm created its own distinct place of worship. The post-colonial Indian state further contributed to this process, perhaps best demonstrated by making illegal the very use of caste names such as Chuda. But within the sphere of agrarian economy, and this is important to me, lower caste would have little choice than to continue in the debilitating labors that structured their daily existence. So even if you say you can't use caste names, you create all those legal provisions, and he borrows his framework from the discussion, as I said, on the Jewish question, on the emergence of the secular state, so-called, where the Christian Persia is dealing with the discrimination against the Jews, and Marx discusses it and says, even if you define in the state that the state has to not to look at people's religion, does the discrimination that the Jews experience, will it be addressed? So he makes that connection between difference and discrimination. And the discrimination persists. And if I were to put it in very simple language, the discrimination is rooted in the economic structure, in the class relations that have been historically built in Punjab at that point of time, and would be as applicable today, and when you look at the contemporary Punjab today. So landless laborers professing a different freight from the landowning peasant nonetheless remained without land and therefore confined to the bottom rungs of a new rural hierarchy. What this reveals then is that the struggle for full emancipation, for a different horizon, for transcending rather than overturning the modern configuration of caste. And he refers to it, but he doesn't deal with it, that if this is the case, that, the economic structure has to be changed and this whole discrimination has to be addressed, then how the mindset has to be changed, the larger issue of human emancipation. And he refers somewhere about Marx's notion of emancipation and human emancipation. But obviously, there's not much elaboration. That's not the mandate of the book. But that's something for us to think, that if this argument we accept, that, even if there might be change in the social status, but the sharing of the economic surplus remains highly unequal, as rooted in the material conditions. What is the kind of politics and social mobilization that we need? And what are the goals we need to set ourselves for as a society in order to address this discrimination and seek a better human emancipation or for a more equal world for each one of us? And that's an open question. There's an interesting section on, the intellectual history of the category of peasant, and how in the West, the notion of the peasant, that has been constructed is different from the notion of the peasant that the colonial state constructed in India. I mean, I've already alluded to it in half a line. For the West or for Europe, peasantry was always, often associated with, being lazy, being, irrational, being inefficient, and so on and so forth. But in just simply put, in Punjab, there was a whole hierarchy. Some people were considered industrious. Some people were considered lazy. Some people were considered useful and productive. Others were not. So it was not a universal imagining of a peasant, which said peasant was something that, that because in Europe, peasant was to go out. Peasant was, it was withering away. In Punjab, as argued earlier, peasant is re-engaging, is re-embedded in the economy and society. So the imagination of a peasant, what is a peasant, how puts a peasant mind, and so on and so forth. The imagining of the peasant is also different, implicitly and explicitly, in terms of the various reports that the colonial state produces and the way it mobilizes and seeks loyalty. Remember, for the British state, the ultimate question has to remain in power, to continue with its colonial control. And therefore, it needs allies at the same time as it needs to implement its modernization project. So it builds allies also. It creates this notion that, there's a martial race. They have this, immense caliber. So they create all of this. They create friends and enemies both. They just couldn't have created enemies, if I simply put it. They wanted friends, partners as well. Partners for the continuation of the colonial regime. And the book has a very serious elaboration of this aspect. Again, 6-7 key distinctions that the book lists about what are the characteristics of the peasantry in Europe and how do they differ or compare with the characteristics of the imagination of the peasant that is built in Punjab. And there, again, I'll skip the details if there are questions then. The chapter 5, makes an important point about the history of economic change in colonial Punjab, in the absence of the advent of peasantry and the absence of a proletariat. So it's more of the implication of the book in terms of the larger theoretical debate. At the moment, we can sort of, given the we can just leave it for now. So overall, book at one level rejects the idea that Marx was Eurocentric, because this is a charge on Marxist political economy and Marx that, all the theorization that they did was based on experience of Europe. And that's where I think Navyug is experimenting a new thing. New thing because he uses the post-colonial theory. The post-colonial theory is overburdened with this idea that, bulk of this theorization is Eurocentric. Navyug doesn't share that it is Eurocentric. But at the same time, book does not accept the notion that his ideas are automatically universal. So he stands on both legs. In a sense, uses the post-colonial theory, to understand the reality of colonial Punjab at that point of time. At the same time, does not reject and say, therefore, there is no understanding of the evolution and building of capitalism. So in a sense, the understanding of the evolution of capitalism in Western Europe doesn't become completely irrelevant, of no use to understand. There's no complete rejection, inversion. So the post-colonial theory, a fair bit of scholars would say that. He moves on to keep emphasizing the fundamental production relations or the class relations of that point of time as of immense significance. So in that sense, it's not Eurocentric. At the same time, it does not accept the idea that the ideas are automatically universal, that all historical phenomena follow the propositions elevated to the status of logic derived from its texts. So this is more about, how Marx is read and, how people after Marx have read Marx and so on and so forth. The other point about it is that Marxist political economy and post-colonial theory both analyze power dynamics and exploitation, though from different angles. Okay. The Marxist political economy focuses on material conditions, class conflict, capital expansion as the root of global inequality. Post-colonial theory examines cultural, discursive, and lasting impacts of colonial rule, often filtering Marxism through critiques of Eurocentrism, power relations, and identity. As I said earlier, this book is an effort to initiate some kind of a dialogue or a conversation between them. And I heard one of Navyug's interviews somewhere, and he says that he's both welcomed and critiqued on both the platforms, in the sense that the Marxists like him, but only not fully, and the post-colonialists like him, but not fully, because there's a partial agreement and a fair bit of disagreement, and that applies to other schools of thought. And that's interesting. So why I say it's very interesting is because as he does this, again, as young students, please realize, when you say that there is a possibility of a dialogue between two schools of thought, it is not an approach suggesting we need to have a balanced approach. He already has an approach. It's not like, let's take 10% from here, 20% from here. It's not about this balanced kind of, this very common in social sciences, people saying, don't take extreme positions, let's have a balanced approach. He has a theoretical position, but his theoretical position is not burdened by the fixed frameworks of either of the theoretical frameworks. So that doesn't mean absence of a framework. And that's very significant, that there is an emphasis on the material conditions. There's an emphasis on class relations. So there is this belief in the Marxist political economy as an approach to look at reality, but there is the inadequacy of the Marxist political economy to deal with questions of, caste, culture, and so on and so forth, where he's using the learnings from post-colonial theory in order to enrich his understanding. I may be wrong, but that's the way I had understood it. There are other works on Punjab dealing with this similar question of, agrarian question, particularly the work of Niladri Bhattacharya. I'm not going to spend time, but Niladri, if students here are interested, it'll be interesting to compare Navyug's framing and Niladri's framing and what they have in common and what they have in how it's different. I'll not go into the details at the moment, but I can just maybe say in 2 lines that Niladri's work is more about historiography. It's about methods of history. And therefore, how do you see the emergence of the agrarian for Niladri? For Navyug, it's more of a question of, as I said, caste, land, and class in colonial Punjab as it emerges. So for him, it's more of a question of caste and class. For Niladri, it's more of a question of the agrarian and the methods of historiography, and so on. So let me just come to my end of my observations. What does it tell me about contemporary resistance? What does it tell me of understanding about contemporary issues as of today in Punjab, the debates that are going on? So first, outrightly, his work undermines a dominant political diagnosis of Punjab's agrarian crisis. What is that diagnosis? That whatever is the agrarian crisis of Punjab, it is a result of insufficient capitalist transformation. Semi-feudalism, persistence of peasantry, lack of labor mobility. So much of the contemporary policy thinking, liberalization, contract farming, land consolidation, assumes that the peasantry is anachronistic and further market integration will resolve the agrarian crisis. So this is one implication. Gill also shows that Punjab's agrarian order is already a product of capitalist modernity, not its absence. The crisis is not of lag, but an outcome of a historically specific capitalist caste formation. Now, this has implications of how you deal with today. So the policies that are premised on finishing the transition to capitalism misdiagnoses the problem and deepening the very hierarchies that produce the crisis. Now, this is very significant because when you look at problems of labor market today, unemployment, which the majority of the young people in this hall would experience or are already experiencing, the lack of opportunities and future. Much of India's labor market framing is based on an understanding that we are going to build, we are waiting for the structural transformation to happen. The argument is that what we have, those who are labor economists argue that what we have is a truncated structural transformation. We don't have a complete energetic structural transformation in India. In other words, this movement from agriculture to industry to service, which I talked about. And therefore, the labor market policies or policies that impact the labor market are to deal with strengthening the forces of the market. जिसको आम भाषा में is often said, we need higher growth rates. Higher growth rates will address the problems because why? Because we are waiting for that transformation to occur. So all of those questions get linked with our understanding what he's arguing. Second, Gill's argument also problematizes the idea of a homogeneous farmer subject. He shows the hereditary caste present was created through colonial law, land ownership, became a member of caste modernity, and landless laborers were structurally excluded from this category. I've already said this. Why now this matters for contemporary in Punjab? Contemporary farmers movement in Punjab often mobilize around issues of MSP, procurement, market protection, but from the standpoint of cultivators. Gill's reading of the history reveals that his politics, this politics of MSP and so on and so forth, cannot automatically speak for the landless Dalits. It may in fact reproduce the exclusions built into the agrarian order itself. A politics that invokes the farmer without confronting caste-structured land ownership risks reinscribing historical domination even when opposing the neoliberal reform. And I think this is very important that, they might be opposing the neoliberal reform, but the direction in which it is going, it might reinforce. Third, Gill demonstrates that religious conversion, legal equality, and cultural recognition, Dharm, Sikhism, constitutional rights, did not undo material subordination. I've already made the point. Lower caste could reject stigmatizing religions and yet remain landless, tried to menial labor, locked into agrarian hierarchy. Now, why is this important? This challenges contemporary politics that relies heavily on symbolic inclusion, identity recognition, and legal reform alone. Caste emancipation in Punjab cannot be separated from struggles over land, over wages, and agrarian power. Anti-caste politics that avoid agrarian political economy remain structurally limited. Fourth, Gill's work re-enters land as an enduring source of rural power. He shows that while traditional occupations become obsolete, land did not. It remained the foundation of hierarchy and domination in rural Punjab. Now, why is this important? Contemporary Punjab often shifts focus towards skill development, migration, diversification from agriculture. Gill's history implies that without confronting land relations, such strategies merely rearrange vulnerability, not eliminate it. Thus, demand for access to common land, higher agriculture wages, land redistribution are not residual or outdated. They directly confront the historical core of Punjab's agrarian inequality. Finally, Gill's critique of the trans-historic peasant also undermines the neoliberal narrative that treats peasants as inefficient, deficient, in need of displacement, or need to be disciplined. This directly informs the critique of contract farming, corporate procurement, deregulated markets. Neoliberal reform is not a neutral modernization project. It extends a historical logic that already preceded the agrarian distress. So in his remarks on the farmers' movement, Navyug says that it does not address the ecological crisis. It does not resolve the larger issue of indebtedness. So issues of ecological crisis, issues of indebtedness remain, and the challenge is how to bring it integrated with the farmers' demands. Gill's agrarian future is not preordained because its past was historically specific and its future can be politically reimagined. I'll end here. Sorry, I took more time, but I think I was told by Karamjit that I can take 5 minutes of hers. So it was a secondary market that we quietly established here, and I used it to my advantage. I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Professor Sucha Singh Gill, for overshooting my time, but as I said, there was a hidden arrangement here so that overall we remain within the time frame. Thank you. Amazing.
You have tried to relate the history with the present, and you have tried to relate the politics of agrarian mobilization with the emancipation agenda, and had tried to study the book in the context of specificity of Punjab, where religion has become very important, and that religion originally had a very important emancipatory and egalitarian agenda, but somewhere down the line it has given up that project itself, and we have been able to produce a specific situation in the Punjab. Now we invite Dr. Karamjit Malhotra to make her presentation. Dr. Malhotra is an assistant professor at Punjabi University, Patiala, Department of Historical Studies. She has a very important book, The 18th Century Sikh History, Political Resource, Religious and Social Life and Cultural Articulation, Oxford University Press, 2016. She has been on the editorial board of several journals, including the past and present being brought about by Punjabi University. And she works in the Department of Historical Studies, which organizes regularly Punjab History Conference, where issues of Punjab history, contemporary history are also discussed. May I request her to make her presentation?
Thank you, sir. Respected Dr. Mohinder Singh Ji, Professor S.S. Gill, Professor Sood, Dr. Navyug Gill, distinguished scholars and students, I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Mohinder Singh. Going through this work has been an educative experience. I may add, my modest response to Dr. Gill's work is based largely on my understanding of the pre-colonial period. And I'm glad that I gave 5 minutes to Dr. Sood, and he was able to explain certain issues so well. I was enlightened by his thoughts. So it has been a pleasure to go through this beautifully produced book by Dr. Navyug Gill. It has all the features of a serious academic contribution with an impressive bibliography, extensive references, and useful maps, tables, and figures. It is based on a large number of contemporary reports and secondary works published in the subcontinent and abroad. Its approach is markedly interdisciplinary. The author is located in the discipline of history, but uses insights and social theory from a number of disciplines, particularly political economy and anthropology. The book has been written from the subaltern and Marxist perspectives, which are often enriched by comparisons with Western Europe. Essentially, the author questions assumptions about the benevolence of colonial rule, especially in relation to the sturdy Punjab peasantry. He brings out the complexities of colonial governance and the Punjabi society. Its central point is the passing of the Punjab Alienation of Land Act 1901, which created the binary of the agriculturist and non-agriculturist caste in the Punjab. The introductory chapter, among other things, provides theoretical and historiographical review. The first chapter dwells on the conquest and early administration of Punjab, fixation and collection of land revenue, canal colonies, and survey and selection of suitable groups for ownership of land. The author calls it, I quote, an invasive process of surveillance and settlement. He says that the so-called civilizing economics, extensive surveys and experiments were rather exceptional when compared to Europe. Chapter 2 addresses the question, who is a peasant? The terms traditionally used for him, according to the author, were kisan, kashtkar, hal wahi, matlab hal wan wala. Through the census reports of 1855, 1868, and 1881, the British gradually moved towards defining an agriculturist based on origin, caste, and landholding, so as to restrict access to the land market, that is, sale and purchase of land. The author maintains that the notion of a hereditary caste peasant owning land is a demonstrably new phenomena. Chapter 3 is addressed to what Dr. Gill calls the debt crisis, with three sides to it: peasants, moneylenders, and the colonial state, which posed a challenge to law and order in the northwest Punjab. Here, the agriculturists were mostly Muslim and indebted to the moneylenders who were Hindu. The debt was mounting, and the colonial legal framework facilitated transfer of the debtor's land to the creditor, resulting in growing tension in the area. This chapter discusses Thorburns' efforts to rectify this situation by collecting evidence and writing extensively about it, but it had no effect initially. The British did not attribute the growing debt and unrest to their own administration. Eventually, after prolonged surveys and much resistance from different quarters, a bill was proposed and passed in 1901. The British thus tried to solve this problem by creating caste-based private property, according to the author. I will come back to this point later. A substantial part of chapter 4 is given to menials, kamins, integral to the rural division of labor, which facilitated agricultural operations and the day-to-day life in the village. They had their own internal hierarchy. The traditional arrangement under which they functioned is generally referred to as the sepidari or jajmani system, which signified relations based on mutual support and obligations. This chapter brings out the contractual economic relationship between the Siri and the owner of the land. The village studies used in this book provide insights into patterns of food consumption and everyday experience of the laboring and proprietary classes. Another important aspect related to the quest of the laboring classes, low caste for upward social mobility through religious conversion to Islam, Christianity, Singh Sabha, and the Akali movement. Incidentally, the Arya Samaj is missed here. Considerable space is given to the Adhara movement among the leather workers in Chamars in Jalandhar who sought to create an alternative religion. Some groups also had recourse to census operations for returning themselves as belonging to higher castes. Chapter 5 focuses on what the author calls the ideology of political economy. Even when using theory generously and looking for insights into the works of Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Lenin, and drawing comparisons with Europe, the author cautions that the ground realities, they were not comparable to the situation in Punjab. The theoretical digressions at times distract the reader from the point under discussion. As a student of medieval Punjab, I may draw the author's attention to a few aspects on the bases, partly of my own work, but largely that Professor J.S. Grewal and Professor Indu Vanga. For example, the fourfold system has been historically weak, especially in the northwestern region. In the village hierarchy in southeast and central Punjab, the Brahmins had some say in ritual matters. In socio-economic life in central Punjab, Khatris had been most important among Hindus. They also owned agricultural land, as evident from the early 19th century account of a Khatri named Ganesh Das Vadera. Moreover, the compositions of Bhagats or sons like Kabir, Ravidas, and even Namdev were clearly different from the Vaishnav Bhakti. The relatively liberal socio-religious situation in Punjab was due to the influence of Sufism, which spread first in this region. There is enough empirical evidence about property right in land in pre-colonial period. Professor Irfan Habib has worked on it. Judicial documents and sale deeds in Persian clearly point out to heritable and saleable right in land. On the ground and according to the Shariat, it was absolute as well. Therefore, what is said in the context of property right in Bengal or Banaras may not necessarily be applicable to the pre-colonial Punjab. Also, in the contemporary sources of this period, the term zamidar, in the sense of a cultivating peasant proprietor, is clearly distinct from a revenue collector with superior rights in land and who is also called the zamindar. Historians generally distinguish between them respectively as the primary and secondary zamindars. I may leave the author with one question. What is the area of study of this book? It suggestively begins with Isa Khel, but there is no reference to the Southeast Punjab. Or could we say that this is a study of the processes played out in colonial Punjab, which was brought into contact with the market forces outside India? This is my question to you. For me personally, it has been a rewarding experience to go through Dr. Navyug Gill's book. It unmistakably brings out the nature of colonial rule and exposes its justificatory claim. It lays bare the complexities and contradictions of agricultural production and village life in Punjab. It was reassuring to read that Guru Nanak was the founder of a new faith. With a few exceptions, most of the works produced in the West remain non-committal about what Guru Nanak set out to do. Mercifully, unlike most scholars of Punjab and Sikh history in the West, Dr. Navyug Gill shuns the echo chamber, which to my mind is a great strength of his work. He uses a cross-section of scholarly works by Indian, Western, and other scholars. Lastly, this book begins and ends on an optimistic note when it quotes Baba Farid about the hopes and aspirations of the poor peasant who toils in grinding poverty. A reference to the recent agitation of the farmers here is meaningful. Thank you.
Good. Karamjit, I'm glad that you have raised the question of medieval historians trying to establish that some form of peasantry and proprietary rights in land were existing before the arrival of the Britishers. And this need to be taken into consideration. And secondly, the Jagirdari system here was different from the Western because here there were revenue Jagirdari system rather than the real ownership of land by one person or two person in a village. So therefore, I'm glad that you have raised some of these questions which need greater attention of the author. Now, Navyug, now it's your turn to respond to what you want to say.
Anji, yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure if it is going to be loaded or if I should try to do a share screen from here. Mohinderji, could you let us know?
Sir, we are sharing the screen from here.
Oh, okay. And so will I just tell you when I want to go to the next slide, Nathan?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. So, of course, let me start again by saying thank you to Mohinderji for organizing this event and the entire staff at the Bhai Veer Singh Sahitya Sadan. I've been inspired not only by his scholarship on Punjabi politics, but his leadership of this invaluable institution. I'm also very delighted to see so many wonderful students and young people in attendance. I deeply appreciate the Drs. Gill, Sood, and Malhotra for their willingness to engage with my book. It is a real honor to have such esteemed interlocutors bringing their expertise to bear from such distinct disciplinary perspectives. The greatest joy, I think, for an author is to be understood, and I really feel that from the comments I've received. My only regret is that I'm not present with all of you there in Delhi to have experienced the conversation firsthand. So Rab Mehr kare ve agli bari asi ਚੱਜ ਨਾਲ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਈਏ. So in the short time that I have, I'm going to respond to the comments at the end, but I want to just sort of say a few things about the book and try to give people in the room who might not have read it yet a sense of what I'm trying to do. So first, I'm going to lay out the main themes and questions of the book. Second, I'm going to provide a glimpse into some of the different chapters as well as the archival materials I worked through. And then I'm going to conclude by gesturing to a few of the wider implications of the argument. And again, I think as Dr. Sood mentioned, let me also just say that this is very much an academic book. It makes an intervention into the existing literature. It's steeped in the debates around agrarian studies, post-colonial theory, and new histories of capitalism. My sincere hope is that even without specialized training, general readers will be able to get a sense of what is going on and why it matters. And maybe I'll come back to this at the very end and we can take it up more in the discussion. So, as was mentioned, my book investigates the historical emergence of the peasant and the creation of a new form of capitalist hierarchy in colonial Punjab. British officials regarded the region as the quintessential agrarian province inhabited by a uniquely diligent, prosperous, and martial race of cultivators. They understood the peasant to be, quote, the predominant unit of society, insisting that the most important consideration of all was to implement policies of agrarian improvement and upliftment. This discourse of what I term colonial benevolence was underpinned by an ostensibly moderate revenue demand and protective legislation, coupled with the massive expansion of canal irrigation and extensive recruitment into the colonial military. This is something we ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਆਂ ਵੀ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਨਹਿਰਾਂ ਕੱਢੀਆਂ ਔਰ ਫੌਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਰਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਔਰ ਵਧੀਆ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਬਣਾਏ and overall ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ. Rather than the immiseration, displacements, and insurgencies that mark other regions of British India, Punjab is seen in much of the popular and even scholarly literature as a bastion of loyalty, enjoying an unrivaled period of stability and growth. Yet the narrative of a benevolent colonialism championing a stalwart peasantry is belied when examined through the prism of how caste, labor, and capital transformed the equation of rural power. The claim that peasants remained unscathed, if not strengthened, takes for granted both the idea of the peasant and the nature of agricultural production, as well as the intent and operations of the colonial state. At a deeper level, it normalizes particular class and caste hierarchies by presupposing a continuity from the pre-colonial through to the colonial and post-colonial periods. Now, I challenge the givenness of this agrarian order and the denial of its modern transformation by asking three questions. How did colonial racial, fiscal, and legal policies align the category peasant with hereditary caste identity? What kinds of contestations over collective status, access to credit, and land ownership did this generate among different groups of Punjabis? And what did this mean for the ways global capitalist processes became implicated in local forms of knowledge and power? So the book uncovers the tangled politics of how and why colonial officials and ascendant Punjabis together disrupted existing conceptions of identity and activity to generate a new form of hierarchy masked as traditional. The result was the creation of a modern group of hereditary, caste-based, land-owning peasants alongside other groups engaged in cultivation, yet relegated to the status of landless laborers. Now, writing a history of the division of labor opens up possibilities for rethinking the conventions of at least three avenues of historical research. So the first, and maybe most obvious, is that the book questions the very category peasant. Perhaps the most durable figure in modern history, peasants have long been a font for a vast assortment of arguments. We can stay on the first picture. So, in every discipline in the humanities and social sciences, Still, underlying much of this literature is the notion that the peasant simply existed everywhere, a general, if not generic figure traced backward from modernity to the recesses of primordial times. This is the claim that Kisani ਸਾਡੇ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਦੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ. Yet these two claims, ubiquity and antiquity, ought to provoke a pause. The obviousness of the peasant is precisely what demands re-examination in terms of what this category meant in different historical contexts, which groups came to occupy it, and how that shaped not only rural political economy, but what we think we know about the past. The taken for granted status of the peasant is thus itself an element in its historical emergence. Second, the book also calls into question the centrality of the colonizer-colonized divide for histories of the colonial world. Such a stark, totalizing binary was in fact generated by European conquests that regarded societies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas as inherently inferior, which anti-colonial movements inverted as part of their struggle to resist and expel foreign domination. Yet as Frantz Fanon and Amy Césaire remind us, there have always been doubts about the presumed unity and coherence of those deemed colonized. Not only did certain elite local actors ally with European powers, but others took advantage of the tumult of colonial rule, while internal fissures over class, caste, religion, ethnicity, and language were fitfully subsumed, though never silenced, as part of most mainstream anti-colonial nationalism. This book confronts the elusive unity of the colonized by foregrounding the competition and contradictions that developed within Punjabi society during the 19th and early 20th centuries. So, ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਸਮਾਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਤ ਤੇ ਵਰਗ ਦੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਲੜਾਈਆਂ ਸੀ. I explore how colonialism generated a sustained, multifaceted, and unpredictable societal conflict from which certain groups emerged atop a new hierarchy to the exclusion and exploitation of others. Lastly, the book offers an alternative genealogy of global capital. So if the transformative quality of the bourgeois mode of production is indisputable, the debate over its provenance, essential features, and trajectory has been equally inconclusive. Over a century of political and scholarly writings have in various ways explored what constituted capitalism proper, how and where it began, and what it meant for people in different parts of the world. Now, much of this revolves around competing interpretations of the oeuvre of Karl Marx alongside the supposedly exemplary experience of Western Europe. Rather than attempting to clinch this debate or dismiss it out of hand, I take inspiration from the diversity of perspectives and embrace the contingency it suggests as inherent to all forms of radical change. So this requires drawing on Marx differently, as was mentioned, not as an authoritative means to adjudicate the truth of capitalism, but as a historical figure offering profound and penetrating, yet inescapably elliptical insights into the world he was able to witness. As Antonio Gramsci remarked, Marx foresaw the foreseeable, and not everything everywhere and for all times. So basically, ਸਾਡੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਕੈਪੀਟਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਵੱਖਰਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਆ ਯੂਰਪ ਦੇ ਤਜਰਬੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ. Far from a simple criticism, I try to think with as well as across and through Marx to make sense of a distinctive global context. Now, let me shift to give you a sense of what's going on in the different chapters and share some of the materials I worked with. So, yes. Here we have a sample of the different settlement reports that I used, and many scholars have worked with these materials before. And this is where colonial officials would evaluate soil and water and crops, but also evaluate human beings and mark that some were lazy and violent, some were thrifty and diligent, some were honest and hardworking. And these evaluations factored into revenue responsibilities and land ownership. Now, this kind of study, this kind of process stands in contrast to the narrative of primitive accumulation we receive from Marx in the last few chapters of Capital Volume 1, where he focuses on the dispossession and dislocation of peasants. This is something that people like Rosa Luxemburg and David Harvey have elaborated on. Which is basically the idea of people in the countryside being pushed off their land and forced into cities to become workers in factories. In Punjab, the opposite occurs, which is an accumulation of attachments, where people in the countryside are attached to parcels of land in new ways. and thus a different form of capitalism. And this is, again, a point that was mentioned by Dr. Sood. A lot of Indian leftist parties, haje vi is masle de vich phase rahe hai. Is it pre-capitalist? Is it semi-feudal? Te oh gallan de upar bahs hundi rendi hai. The next slide. In one of the chapters, I show, this screaming headline from the New York Times from the year 1900, which basically blames peasants for wasteful spending, who then fall prey to unscrupulous moneylenders, which then leads to calls for state intervention. And yet, I also, in the same chapter, look at rural studies from the Board of Economic Inquiry, which tracks family consumption patterns over decades. And what they show is that the vast majority of people in the countryside are spending 70, 80, 90% of their incomes just to feed and clothe their members. There's no entries for lavish feasts and jewelry and ornaments and such things. I mean, they're basically barely surviving. And yet most of them are still falling into debt. And so in this way, the debate became about the state protecting peasants from greedy moneylenders and their own habits, which in fact normalized the new volatility of the rural economy. And this is a kind of argument, it's made here in the year 1900, but you could read an article in the New York Times from 2008 and the foreclosure crisis in the US, which again blames peasants for, and blames people for their own irresponsibility. And one sign of this, we can go back to the previous slide. One sign of this is if you look at the rates of debt before the Punjab Alienation of Land Act, they're actually the same before and after the act. The only difference being who are the cultivators falling into debt to and who are they selling their land to. The next chapter, we can go to the next slide. This is a certificate for agriculturalist status after the Punjab Alienation of Land Act of 1901. And this is a demonstration of the use of legislation to create a new legal category, member of an agricultural tribe, who were the only ones allowed to participate in the new land market. And this, for me, demonstrates how identity became a prerequisite to market participation. And it's a striking document for many reasons, but again, legislating who could buy and sell land based on hereditary identity and enshrining it in law is something that the Mughals don't do. It's something that Ranjit Singh doesn't do. It's actually something very new under the auspices of the colonial state. The last slide is, sorry, before this one, yes. This is a contract between a landowner and a Siri, which I uncovered from one of the Board of Economic Inquiry reports. And it shows how Siris do all of the work of cultivation without acquiring the status of a peasant. So the person in this document is actually a weaver by caste, and they do all of that work alongside a cultivator. And yet, and they experience a kind of intimacy because they're working side by side. They're often eating meals together in the fields. Yet there's a distance because one is the owner of the land and receives the majority of its produce. These are not zamindars with 1,000 acres and tenants, but these are self-cultivating peasants with this form of attached bonded labor. And it's actually a very difficult conversation to have. It's a difficult concept to think through. One expression of the complexity of the dynamic is from Sant Ram Udasi's poem Jat Te Siri Da Hal from the 1970s, which kind of captures that fraught relationship of camaraderie, yet hierarchy, apart, yet apart at the same time. So now, to conclude, what might all of this mean in a larger context? Within the landscape of colonial Punjab, I try to show how the domains of culture and economy were co-constituted and intertwined to produce a new set of relations, processes, and hierarchies. Studies of colonialism have usually segregated the two. So writings on knowledge practices, social categories, and popular perceptions remain apart from cropping patterns, debt ratios, and household expenses. Cultural politics are dissonant with the politics of economic life, an intellectually and historically untenable divide. So तकरीबन economic analysis कह लो वखरा रहिंदा from cultural analysis. And मेरी कोशिश है भी ये दो fields नू इकट्ठे करन दे. This book proceeds differently, starting with a challenge to the dominant premise of a stalwart and self-evident peasantry enduring and even prospering under a benevolent colonialism. Rather than inverting this theme by insisting on immiseration and underdevelopment, I have attempted to bring the history of the ideological and material conditions involved in making such an assumption to the fore. So certain caste groups became relatively empowered through the designation of agricultural tribes and gained access to a new land market, while others were made into menial laborers, denied entitlements to ownership and resources. These processes produced the figure of the hereditary landowning peasant and positioned it at the top of a novel yet volatile capitalist agrarian order. So this habit of referring to unmarked aggregate groups, Punjabis and Indians, as much as Nigerians, Egyptians, and Chinese, should no longer be normalized. Together, these very themes demonstrate the contestations inherent to one of the most naturalized features of society, the division of labor. Who does what and counts as whom? The lucid serenity of the phrase itself conceals a world of struggles, both grand and quotidian. As this quote from Adam Smith, we can go up one quote, please. Signals the originary and masculine status of agriculture and its linear progression is fundamental to the political imagination of the West. And this is that last chapter, which is a kind of intellectual history of the category peasant. Hereditary peasants with exclusive land rights and overwhelming class power were an explicitly modern product, one that emerged out of the colonial imbrication of primordial identity and practical activity. The selective use of caste, religion, and tribe ensured that this transformation affected Punjabi society unevenly, privileging some groups while discriminating against others, yet all the while appearing in conformity with so-called native culture and ancient tradition. At the same time, the book provides an opportunity to revisit understandings of both the expectations and operations of capital in the colonial world. With an awareness that capitalism does not produce uniformity, differences in the political economy of Punjab cease to be signs of inferiority or remnants of backwardness with a given trajectory towards correction. And this was also mentioned in the discussion. Agriculture and the relationship between peasants and laborers were neither vestiges of a frozen pre-colonial culture, nor variants of a feudalism marked by stages, the semi, the quasi, the pseudo. By demonstrating the historical production of these differences, not only is their fixity undone, but so too is the perception that they are mere impediments to a preordained future. Indeed, part of my argument is that the specific emergence of the Punjabi peasant precludes its inclusion within the rubric of a worldwide and trans-historical peasantry. Instead, I describe how an accumulation of attachments provided certain castes with land ownership, while juridical processes aligned identities with occupations, and fiscal policies restricted access to the market, all amid a discourse of paternalism which naturalized the new instability of the economy. Finally, in the last slide, Marx too, in this quote, points to the specificity of knowledge categories, productive relations, and the commodity form. As was mentioned, in Punjab, fields were plowed, crops grown, and grain harvested for hundreds of years without a fixed notion of the peasant. That subject, singular, exclusive, masculine, caste-based, emerged only at the particular juncture of colonial technologies of rule, instigating an internal struggle for primacy among different groups of Punjabis. So, shorn of the solidity of antiquity, the peasant, along with the splintered logics of colonialism and capitalism from which it emerged, are made to confront the mutability of modernity. Perhaps it is from this breach that we might create space to think through different possibilities for forging those emancipatory horizons that we are so desperately in need of. Let me just make a few additional points just based on the discussion. So we can stop the slide share, but I just want to address some of the comments which were incredibly rich, and I'm really grateful to Dr. Sood and Malhotra. The one thing I want to say, and I really appreciate how Dr. Sood, he said something about the writing is nearly poetic, and really captured what I was trying to say and could convey it to the group in the room today, I think this is an actual challenge that scholars have, and it kind of hinges on this word accessible. And how do we write accessible histories? And what does it mean to write in an accessible way? So at one level, I mean, I struggle with this because every scholar, I think, but I want to be read. I want to be understood. I take no pleasure in, digressions and using sort of jargon. I try to avoid it as much as possible. But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize specialized language and training. And I think we don't do this for any other discipline. If I picked up, or people here picked up a chemistry textbook, or a biology textbook, or a physics textbook, or if we tried to read a physics article or a chemistry article, it wouldn't make sense to me at all. It would sound like gibberish. And I wouldn't have the expectation to be able to understand it because I recognize the training required for something like physics or chemistry. Somehow with history, there is a sense that it belongs to everybody and everybody should be able to read every history. And if we can't read it, then it's some problem of the text, without paying attention to the fact that there is a kind of specialized training that is involved in even understanding history, or English or anthropology or philosophy. So I just want to kind of underscore that tension that remains. And I think it's maybe especially relevant in places like India, where there's a kind of new crop of popular historians and scholarly historians, and a kind of tension between the two, and a kind of manufactured controversy over opposing these two styles of writing. And I think each have their place. And I'm striving towards, I think, holding together that contradiction. Quickly, I think the other point I wanted to just mention a couple of points about what Dr. Sood mentioned about post-colonial theory and Marxism. I absolutely agree, and I'm so glad you picked up on that. I am striving to undo the opposition between the two. I'm not hard in one camp or the other. As you mentioned, actually, I presented parts of the book in many different conferences, and it was always like some people in the Marxist camp would claim it, but then be unhappy with certain elements. And some people in the sort of post-colonial world would claim the text, but then be unhappy with other elements. I'm okay with people being unhappy. I'm not trying to please everyone. And I think that the opposition between the two is also sort of unnecessary and unhelpful. So I appreciate that insight that you had about holding together the question of knowledge practices alongside material relations. The other point, again, that you mentioned was, again, this issue of the semi-feudal and the way that category and there's a kind of tendency also, I guess, in Punjabi or Indian culture, where if we regard something in society that we don't like, we say, yaar semi-feudal soja, or these people are backward. And this kind of claim of backwardness, as if we are waiting for this moment when they will arrive in modernity and will be shorn of all of these backward things, the patriarchy, the casteism, the discrimination of this or that sort. And I think this is an insight I picked up from Latin scholars from the 1970s, Andre Gunde Frank. He writing in the 60s, 70s, and there was a lot of he was writing in Brazil, a lot of Brazilian economists that were looking at the dysfunction and poverty of their society. And they were saying things like, we need more capitalism. This is the problem. We don't have enough capitalism, and we're waiting for capitalism to arrive to get rid of these things. And Andre Gunde Frank said, there is no waiting. This is what capitalism looks like. And trying to undo that paradigm, as you mentioned, of modernization theory and this kind of expected trajectory of Europe to follow. So I think that's also our burden in the subcontinent, to not attempt to follow a kind of blueprint from elsewhere, but have the burden of interpreting the dynamics of our own societies. It is absolutely capitalist, and it's absolutely different. It's just as modern, but of a different sort. And we have to kind of grapple with those differences. The point about the contemporary relevance is also, you picked up on those themes, and I just maybe want to underscore the fact that history and the time period I'm looking at, 19th, early 20th century, bears a lot on the dynamics of today. Of course, there's an entire sort of set of transformations that take place in the post-independence period, namely the green, not actually green revolution, and all the transformations of the agrarian economy then. But I think the willingness to kind of think through difference and to be open to interpreting radical change is something that I hope readers take from the book. To Dr. Malhotra's points, I absolutely, I always appreciate when I'm in conversation with a scholar from the medieval period or the pre-modern period, because they're always reminding us modern folks about, you're making claims about novelty and change, but in fact, there is a longer history. There is a longer genealogy of these concepts. So, of course, J.S. Garewal and Irfan Habib and many others have traced some of these dynamics around ownership and Mughal practices. I'm indebted to that work, Indu Banga's work, of course. But I still mark the difference of the colonial state and the dynamics unleashed under a kind of new and volatile capitalist agrarian order. And while there are longer trajectories, I think the assembling of the racial, the fiscal, the legal domains was something quite distinct. And then finally, the geography. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I am looking at a kind of greater Punjab. I'm looking at a kind of from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom, but south of the Satluj and further west. There's a tendency of scholars that work on Punjab to reproduce partition logic. So if you happen to be from Lenda Punjab, you'll end up writing all about that and calling it Punjab. Or if you're from Chadda Punjab, you'll write all about that, but call it Greater Punjab. So I try to kind of look at different regions and as a kind of whole. Of course, things, when you get down to the specificity of district, the Southeast or the Northwest, the dynamics are different, but I try to hold all of it together. And in the course of doing that, of course, some things may be overlooked. Okay, I know I've taken a long time, but both shukriya. My heart is full. Thank you.
Thank you, Navyug. You have made certain clarifications and contextualized your work in the context of culture, economy, caste, and other things. Now we can open this to the younger scholars if they have any questions. Anyone who want to ask question, that person should identify him or herself and then ask the question.
Hi everyone, Adarsh Kumar Chaudhary here from Guru Nanak College of Education. So my question is, why do you consider the idea of colonial prosperity in Punjab misleading, and how does it hide class and caste inequalities? Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
You can state your name and then ask the question.
Yeah, the first question, could you just say your name? Is it Chaudhary Adil?
It's Adarsh Kumar Chaudhary.
Yes, okay, T.
Anyone else?
Yes, so my name is Lakshmi. So my question is, why is it important to examine the competition within Punjabi society rather than just the struggle against the British?
Hello, myself Sanjana. Colonial officials frame the Isa Kriya riot as a conflict between dictator and creditor rather than a religion one. Does this focus on economic data helps or hinder our understanding of social tension of the time?
Hello, I am Sahib Gill, and I want to ask, ਮੌਜੂਦਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ 30% ਆਬਾਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਦਲਿਤਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਤੇ ਉਹ 4% ਲੈਂਡ ਓਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ, ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਡਿਸਪੈਰਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਅੰਡਰ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਲਿੰਕ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਬੁੱਕ ਨੂੰ?
Okay.
That's
Should
all.
I take this? Should I do this round first, or
I think
maybe we can hear
that's
more questions? Huh.
enough in the first round. You can reply, Navyug.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be brief because you've heard me go on and on. But thank you for these wonderful questions. Yeah, I think the Atul Chaudhry's question. Yeah, I think that colonial prosperity theme is, if you just glance at any of the literature on Punjab, scholarly or otherwise, that is a very prominent theme. That unlike Bengal or Madras, where there was famines and misery and exploitation and insurgencies, Punjab was a bastion of loyalty. And so this is that theme of, we gave you canals, we gave you military recruitment, we had a moderate revenue settlement, and in return, Punjab was loyal and prosperous. And one, it's a kind of just kind of absurd kind of colonialist narrative that got reproduced by subsequent scholars. But also when you kind of look at the situation closely and you look at the dynamics within Punjabi society, you look at hierarchies and exploitations, you actually realize that there's something else that has happened. So this colonial benevolence is a narrative that actually conceals a larger transformation that produces all sorts of new hierarchies. And it's, I think, the first thing one encounters when they study Punjab, this benevolence and prosperity narrative, to the point where people end up saying things like, yeah, it was better when the Angrez were here, right, compared to these rulers that we have now. So this is one of the kind of themes that I want to kind of confront head on. And I think this goes very well with Lakshmi's question about that competition within Punjabi society and why it's important to study it. I mean, this is, again, there is a kind of romantic knee-jerk reaction to frame everything as a kind of us and them, foreigner, native dynamic. And as a result, to conceal divisions and contradictions and hierarchies within society. So let's not talk about caste until we get the gore out. Let's not talk about sexism and patriarchy until we expel the foreigner. Let's not talk about class hierarchies until. And so this kind of deferral about waiting for an ideal moment to address things, this is a part of anti-colonial nationalism as well, to keep quiet on all of these other divisive issues and instead focus on the big struggle. I reject that style of politics. I think that we must confront exclusion and exploitation in whichever ways it occurs alongside broader struggles. It doesn't have to be either or. And so that was a kind of a political question, and then also kind of scholarly in the sense of I was interested in the dynamics within Punjabi society. To Sajjana's questions, I'm probably mishearing your name, so please forgive me. Yeah, the opening vignette about Isa Kale and the riot. I mean, this was something I by chance encountered in the Colonial Archive. You stumble upon something. I was at the National Archives here in Delhi, spent a lot of time there. And I just filed it away and I didn't know what to do with it, but I thought it was kind of important. And then later on, as I was rewriting, I sort of came to it. And what is striking is that you have a situation where Muslims are attacking Hindus, and the colonial state is saying this is not communal. And just right off the bat, it just struck me as kind of odd, because usually whenever there's a kind of discord between religious communities, the colonial state would obsess over it, would amplify it, would try to use that as a justification for, look, these savages can't even get along. That's why we're here, to rule them. And so here there's a kind of scrupulous attempt to kind of exclude religion and to kind of see it in economic terms. And for me, that was a kind of starting point to say that there's a kind of economic logic at play that is inextricable from cultural and religious dynamics, and then to kind of trace the through line from there to the rest of the book. So this was, one of the reasons why I chose that as the opening motif. To Sahib, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਆ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ 30-31-32% ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਆਬਾਦੀ ਚਲੋ ਦਲਿਤ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਆ ਹਾਈਐਸਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਪੋਰਸ਼ਨ ਇਨ ਆਲ ਆਫ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਇੱਕ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਮੈਂ ਲਿਖਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦਾ ਵੀ in this kitab I try to show ਵੀ ਇਹ dynamics ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਆਇਆ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ the answer, this is one of the things I kind of mentioned, is ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਹੁੰਨਾ ਆਪਦੇ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਪਿੰਡ 'ਚ ਹੁੰਨਾ ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਦਾ ਆਪਦੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਪੁੱਛਦਾ ਵੀ ਆਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿੱਕ ਠੋਕ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਖੇਤੀਬਾੜੀ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਮੀਂਦਾਰ ਆ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਇਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਸਦੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਆ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਹ ਬੌਰੀਏ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹ ਮਜ਼੍ਹਬੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਈਵਨ ਯੂਪੀ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਹਾਰ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ ਇਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਕੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫਿਰ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਖੂਨ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਰ ਆ ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟ ਕਾਈਂਡ ਆਫ ਸੈਂਸ ਵੀ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਫਰਕ ਆ ਵੀ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ something that it's a common sense that we have to oppose because ਖੂਨ ਤਾਂ ਯਾਰ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਆ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕੰਮ ਤੇ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜਾਤ ਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਦਾ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਬਣਿਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਫੋਲਣ ਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ to show ਵੀ ਇਹ 3000 ਸਾਲ 2000 1000 ਸਾਲ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਸ 200 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਨਵੇਂ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਣਿਆ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਮਕਸਦ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨਵੇਂ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਣੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਣ ਸਕਦੀ ਸੀ right it's not genetic it's not a biological condition we can change this ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ the question of equality and equity in Punjab is an open question and I think ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਮਦਰਦੀ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਆ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਬ ਕੰਟੀਨੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਕਨਫਰੰਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਹੈ
We can have some more question in the second round, if there are. Yeah.
The book engages with Adam Smith and Karl Marx as theory than the history. So what?
Sorry, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਨਾਮ, your name, sir?
Myself, Jasleen Kaur.
Jasleen, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ.
So what's the significance of a non-Europeanist scholar refusing the boundaries of geography to critique these foundational thinkers?
My name is Jaswinder Singh. Navyug, congratulations for writing very extensively on the relationship between religion, caste, and the divisions. You know, my question is slightly different. I will come to that, but let me give a compliment to you. When you were interpreting history, you made a comment that why, the Punjabis did not participate in 1857 revolution, and you gave the historical justification for that. Because they had the immediate past before 1849, that perhaps was one reason. My question is, the colonial benevolence which Atul Sood has also very extensively discussed and explained. Why Maharaja could not think of this? Because these were the cultivating households. They were primarily, the number of tribals were also there. Why the idea of canal irrigation did not emerge at that time, which British thought that it will be a kind of benevolence for them. And also, Maharaja was also recruiting people, in the military. But why this concept did not go down to the so-called marginalized sections at that time? Because British very intelligently exploited this. And they rewarded the people who were there in the military service with Jagirs and others, you have elaborated this point. So this submission, you have very clearly mentioned the colonial growth and then the subsequent Marxian, framework, the political economy and others. But, Maharaja was also considered to be pro-public, pro-peasants. But these concepts were not very novel. Why these did not emerge, or why it has escaped your attention? Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, sir, and all the panelists. My name is Jayaprakash. So my question is to the author. So you said when you were presenting your work or responding to the questions, you said that a different process was going on in India in comparison to Europe, and the peasants were attached to the land in India, and whereas in Europe they were dragged off or they were taken away from the land. And this is opposite of that. But I think we should not see it, or I do not see it as that, because it's a continuation. Because if we see whatever is happening in India today, it is happening like what was happening in Europe, which we call the Middle Ages, or like the 15th, 16th, or 17th centuries, because that was the demand of economy at that time. And today it is the demand of economy in India that the corporatization should be done, and the peasant should not hold the land, and that's why these land reforms are coming. So at that time in Europe, that was the necessity of economy. And if you are seeing the society materialistically, or from a class position, or from a Marxist political economy, so we should not pose these two processes against each other, but it's a continuation. Because if we see at that time, India was exporting raw material and all these things to Europe, and that was the necessity and that was the need of that economy. So we should see it as that way. I want your comment on that also. And the second thing I would like to ask, I could not understand it today. Like you said that it is a capitalist society. You said that India is a capitalist society, a different kind of capitalism, and people are indulged or confused in semi-feudalism, and they are kind of wasting their time in all these debates. So I would like to ask you, but you have not elaborated, how do you call it capitalist? Whenever we call a society capitalist or semi-feudal or feudal society or colonial society, we give some insights or some markers. There are some proven standards through which we can analyze a society. So you are saying it's a different kind of capitalist society. I agree with you on that. I can agree with you, but you have to provide me something through which I can get a sense of it. So these are my two questions to you. Thank you so much. And one more thing, if you can clarify, what do you what do you mean to see by colonial benevolence? Okay, yeah, okay. So I'll read it. Thank you so much. The first two questions.
See, we are having very engaging, and one can say there's lots of stimulus here. I'm not a student of economics. I'm a student of history, being teaching colonial India and Punjab in particular for almost 4 decades. I have
What's your name, ma'am?
Amrit Kaur Basra, Professor Amrit Kaur Basra. So I have two issues here. One is that as students, as a researcher, we are always being conditioned by our sources, and you have really been true to those sources. We always start from practice and then go to theory. Interplay between practice and theory reaches a point where, in terms of intellectual stimulus and analytical tools, we have moved away from Eurocentrism to diversion debate. You have engaged with that. My simple question is, and here we are really engaging and are troubled with it, why shouldn't we be falling prey to these analytical tools where we end up clarifying them again and again, and leads to more confusion? Because you are very much clear about the fact that there's a public history and there's an intellectual history, academic history, and we should be learning how to be familiar with academic history. This is one important issue. This remains a very, one can say, a perennial kind of an engagement. You can call it intellectual engagement. Second important issue is that when you have been talking about colonial Punjab, Obviously we need to look at it in context of evolving colonial rule, colonial construct, colonial modernity. So we had benevolent dictatorship, you can say despotism in Punjab. Colonialism never introduced that kind of modernity, which is generally linked with Europe in terms of transition from feudalism to capitalism. So the colonial construct at cultural level remained very important. Second, you have really talked about that how categories and peasantry, who was a peasant, these got defined. So from permanent settlement coming up to Mahalwari in Punjab, multiple things are going on. We should not fact this is how the medieval roots of history become so important. Colonial strait, of course, created changes and a kind of a marked transition in terms of looting our resources. There was no colonial modernity, led to colonialism and exploitation. Peasant, you can say poverty, you can say alienation act was there, and you had indebtedness emerging. So we need to be aware of this fact that who was the tiller of land, and when that tiller of land was being recognized in Punjab, was he a usurper? Because in the present discourse of obviously we are looking for equity, and there's a discourse coming which is kind of positing one social segment against other segment in the name of a so-called development paradigm. So that has its political connotation. And third, which is more important, most of our here are from, you can say, we are all females and women. So in terms of land ownership, I have read many records where women were also the owner of land. Temples, gurdwaras, mosques, they were also owning land. Muslims were also owning land. So land was snatched away from women in particular. There was a whole instance in the early years of British rule. So, and then in case of you, Prem Chaudhary has done such wonderful work where very cleverly British moved between modernity and tradition. So we need to be aware about all these, you can say, ongoing historical processes, and definitely it has its bearing not only in colonial Punjab, but also in present day Punjab also. Remember, we must remember, now it is not colonial Punjab. It's truncated Punjab, very little is left with Punjab. Thank you.
Hi Navyug, I am Harinder from Jawaharlal Nehru University. First of all, I will congratulate you for publishing this work, and what Atul sir was saying about like doing a sort of study of Niladri's work and your work, it would be really interesting. And me and my friend Jayaprakash were thinking about it. My question is about the current form of land holding or land use pattern in Punjab. So you have beautifully explained it how the making of peasant happened in Punjab. So I have certain disagreements, but I want to specifically ask you about the current form of agriculture, current mode of agriculture. You mentioned sort of something about resistance or mass mobilization out of the current agriculture, but how do you define the current peasantry in Punjab? Like and I am asking this question in specific reference to how it was in the 1880s or after the independence, because it is not like the same case where only there are only big landlords. Nowadays, if you see in Punjab, there are many. So if we compare data with the 90s, 50s, or 60s. To now, there were I think more than 90% Jats were landholders, but now there is the depagentation process has taken very serious step, and in light of that, in light of accumulation of land to the certain hands, in light of accumulation of land to banyas, artiyas, and I'm talking about the village land, not about the urban land. And the depagentization and the thing that we were associating with the Jat Jameen hundi hai, Jat di maa hundi hai, but but the more the phenomena now, it is very different, because if they are getting very good rates from the land acquisition by the state or the private traders, they are easily able to sell. But of course, there is also this phenomena also which manifested in farmer protest, But how do you see this? Like, I'm asking this question in specific light of the Lenin's division of peasants in several divisions. So it is that it is the homogeneous category of peasant now which is affecting, which is making the mode of production of the state, or it has changed from what you have studied from the colonial. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Navyug Gill. My name is Hari. Actually, I wanted to, just ask you about like some village industries, because village industries are also connected to agriculture. I have read in some works. So actually, like in UK, like England, there was dispossession. Here it is like colonization and making them settle. British had like there was something called like criminalization of tribes and all, and they were made to settle, and that was also used as a tool to recruit and raise resources for their army, like mules and horses and all. So also British was also a little confused about this whole setup. Like during wars, they wanted some material to be manufactured also. So they partly bring some training, like some missionary, some things for like cotton ginning and all, but they are not so consistent in that. And also like in villages, like some works I am working on some research projects. So related to that, I have read that in that like there was some village industries going on, and they were dependent on agriculturalists for like money lenders for the funding and all. So at times of recession and at times of 1930, when the economy was down, like they themselves their build a network to get orders among the through their own internal networks. So actually I wanted to ask, like there was a system or an economic model within the villages that was prevalent in Punjab and other places as well. So what British brought, British tried to bring, which was not so consistent. We lost something. Like if you have covered on that, like what we have lost, and what is the implication of current contemporary situation of Punjab? Is it permanently lost, or is there, or what can we learn from that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to make a request. While I'm happy this has generated good interest among young students, my suggestion is, rather than making parallel statements, please ask precise questions so that our time can be saved. Thank you. Yeah, he can respond.
Should I?
Yeah, please respond.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I respond? Okay. Panji. So again, a really wonderful set of questions. I'm deeply honored and appreciate them. If you want proper answers, let me come to Delhi and we can have a cup of chai somewhere proper and discuss. But for now, let me just sort of schematically go through them because they are so rich. So to Jasleen's question, yes, this point about a non-Europeanist engaging with Marx and Smith and Kautsky and Lenin. Look, this is a kind of it's a kind of odd story in the sense, on one level, I felt a need to do this intellectual history of the category peasant and trace it, from this Lenin-Kautsky debate, which was kind of becoming repopularized in some ways with the kind of revival of Kautsky in certain circles. But I really felt the need to go back to Adam Smith to think about the kind of foundations of the discipline of political economy and how the category peasant is invested with an inadequacy. and this expectation to change. And what does that mean for us? And sorry, the peasant is invested with this inadequacy, this expectation to change, and it is written about as the proletariat emerges. So when you have a kind of manufacturing at the time of Adam Smith's writing, there becomes a need to kind of contrast the agrarian with the urban, and to kind of celebrate the urban and manufacturing while degrading and kind of admonishing agriculture. And I see that as a kind of central element in the entire discipline of political economy. And that is why Marx writes a critique of political economy. But the other reason I want to just quickly say is that as this book was going through peer review, one of the reviewers said, this guy works on Punjab. What business does he have to talk about European thinkers? And the publisher was like, you should take this chapter out, maybe. And I remember having a fight with my editor, email fight, saying, look, for generations, Europeanists have written about my part of the world. And so I'm going to be the non-Europeanist that will write about them, if I find it useful and necessary to explore the arguments. So I am absolutely a non-Europeanist, and I will explore these European thinkers for my purposes. And I succeeded in that tussle, and that's why I put that line in there, that as a non-Europeanist engaging with ostensibly European thinkers. So thanks for pointing that out. To Jacinda's points, yeah, absolutely. I think that the question of 1857, but also about Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom. I think there's so much being written about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and I think a lot of it is, for a long time, it has been kind of one-dimensional and hagiographic and kind of simplistic. And I think there's newer works that are challenging this now. But I think that Ranjit Singh's kingdom was incredibly dynamic. There was irrigation schemes. There were all sorts of different plans of minting coins and producing weapons and a kind of new forms of administration. I do think that the differences, though, are crucial to bear in mind. One is that the colonial state was a centralized state, ruled from Calcutta and then later Delhi over Punjab, and that it was a foreign presence. And I think that the foreign domination, the element of the colonial officials being outsiders, meant that on the one hand, they were paranoid about governing subjects that they could not make sense of, all these different languages and races and tribes and a fear of insurgency at every turn. So in their kind of paranoia and insecurity, they became incredibly invasive to surveil these people and to mark every parcel of land and assign it revenue responsibilities, and indeed to expand cultivation in order to make more land revenue to pay for the rest of the enterprise. Ranjit Singh was an indigenous ruler. And so his methods of rule were different from an alien force that could not but see these people as inferior and dangerous. That's a short answer, and I think newer works on Ranjit Singh and pre-colonial Punjab are kind of exploring these dynamics in better detail than me. To Jayaprakash's points, I can only just say that that notion of a temporal disjuncture is an old colonialist trope. That 14th century, India's present is 14th century England. And that these people are kind of occupying a different time than us. That's like a central theme of colonial logic to point to the inferiority of the people that they're ruling. So I think that it's not simply a matter of India playing catch up to a trajectory of Europe. And indeed, it's not desirable, nor is it possible. If we want to follow that trajectory, are our cities filled with giant factories just waiting to employ people? No. And secondly, do we have places that we can go and colonize and enslave and exploit for 200-300 years? No. So that's actually the story of Europe's industrialization, that they had colonies to conquer and rule over. And so that means that if we think we're going to follow that trajectory, it's a kind of impossibility. And so, in fact, I think that sense of past and present colliding might need to be rethought of. To your quick point about capitalism, what I'll just say is that this is something I picked up from debates about American slavery and the plantation economy. And for a long time, people thought that the plantations, American chattel slavery, was some bygone feudal dynamic. And the newer works have actually shown that in the plantation, in the 17th, 18th century, plantation was a capitalist enterprise. And Alabama and Mississippi were as capitalist as Manchester and Liverpool and Birmingham, but they looked very different. And so this is part of rethinking capitalism off from the factory floor and the industrialized proletariat to forms of agrarian capitalism, slave capitalism, and this kind of wider dynamic. What the book tries to show is these are people that are producing for a market economy. They are paying revenue in cash rather than in kind. There's a new legal regime. There's a new sense of discipline. There's an entirely different dynamic that is capitalist yet different from the way we used to think of its unfolding. Let me just quickly say to Amanatji's questions, I agree completely about Prem Chaudhary. I use her work. It's incredibly valuable for the dynamics, especially around the exclusion of women and the question of ownership and cultivation. Why is it that when we think of peasant, it's always already a man? And we don't think of women being involved in the cultivation process when in so many ways they're essential. The only point I would say about analytical tools is that, as one writes a book like this, you have to situate yourself within an existing literature and look at the landscape of the kind of arguments that have been made and the kinds of frameworks that are available and find your way through them. So it's a kind of necessary evil to kind of have that process of wading through the debates and the literatures and positioning oneself. I think what I try to do is be true to the period that I'm studying and the kind of arguments I want to make, and not rely on fixed formulas. That if some big shot scholar says this and I'm just going to follow their model, or if some very enticing theory that is in vogue now, I'm going to deploy that and put it here. I'm trying to think through from Punjab and then see what helps me understand that. To Harinder's questions and Hari's questions, I mean, I could just quickly just say, like, people like Atulji and Satyaji, they will best tell you about these dynamics. The contemporary situation in Punjab is something I keep up with, but I'll just say that the questions have changed after the Green Revolution, and the issue of land fragmentation, the issue of indebtedness and people getting displaced. I mean, the majority of cultivators own less than 5 acres of land. So the small and marginal peasantry, 20, 30%, 40, you would have better access to the numbers there. But I think that the dynamics have changed because of things like remittance economy, diaspora. There's also cooperatives, different industries. Even in my village in Safuwala in Moga district, people in my village are using small parcels of land to have fisheries and like breeding fish in like small shapar, or like having chicken coops and like raising chickens and selling them off and doing all sorts of different creative things. So there is a kind of dynamic at play that is very different from what I describe in the book, because 100 years of change has taken place. So it is actually very different. And I think that just goes to Hari's question as well about village industries. There are efforts, I think, what happens is one can read op-eds and pieces about the doom and gloom and the kind of disaster befalling the peasantry. But then if you spend a little bit more time, you realize that people are striving to find meaningful ways to live in all sorts of ways. And there are initiatives on the ground, whether it's small-scale production, manufacturing in the countryside, value-added crops and processing of agricultural goods and finding ways to export them. I mean, that is all ripe for students of sociology and economics to kind of explore. But we should never have this sense that people are kind of static. It's actually dynamic. And we all kind of know this intuitively anyway. but it may be a good thing to always bear in mind.
Sir, kindly unmute.
Anji. Oh.
Professor Gill.
Yeah, I think we should move towards winding up the discussion. Still, we can accommodate one or two questions, but not more than that.
There are no more questions, sir. We
Okay,
can.
okay. Thank you very much. Navyug, you have made your case very well and defended your position. I have enjoyed the discussion. Atul Sood made a very comprehensive presentation on your book and raised very relevant question relating the past to present and also the struggle of emancipation of the weaker sections of society, what we call the landless, the lower caste people. They have to be made part and parcel of the development process. These are very important issues, and over the period of time, the issue go on cropping up new one. For example, the women not owning land. Even in the Sikh period, the Ranjit Singh period, the hereditary rights were not transferred to the women. They were transferred to the male persons. So that was an era where the society was a male-dominated society, and the women's constituency as yet was not articulated as it is today. Even today, it's not fully articulated. Now, the strength of your work I find in two ways. One is that the amount of literature you have consulted and you have negotiated with the different streams of thought, from culture to sociology, to economics, to caste, to religion, and various issues. That is a beauty of your work, that you have been trying to relate the evolution of the society under the British rule, not in a fragmented way, but in a very comprehensive way, that the different aspects of life you are trying to understand and reinterpret. So that way, that is a good contribution which you have made, and your grasp over the literature and the facts. And I was very happy when you quoted Sardar Kartar Singh's work from Lalpur, the village studies, and you try to demolish the benevolence thesis of the Britisher, that the peasants were not making expenditure which was not desirable. They were hardly making both ends meet. And the problem of debt toward which this Land Annihilation Act and ultimately which made certain castes as the jamidars or agriculturist and non-agriculturist, that originated from the culmination of debt in the peasantry because of introduction of cash rent, which the British were trying to impose and collect very rigorously. And this problem has continued. Though the non-agriculture castes were not allowed to have land, but even when we reach by 1930s, and Shoturam comes again to have some kind of solution of this problem. So the dominant sections, if they are imposed certain kinds of things, then they go underground and then they reappear again. And this problem has again appeared in the post-colonial period in a big way. The Punjab peasantry at present, hardly you find a household which is not indebted. And this has also something to do with the terms of trade. At what price the farmer is selling and at what price he is getting other kinds of things. So that trajectory has to be integrated. So while reading your book, I have one or two research questions which I believe that they need attention of young scholars, and you also need to look into that. Now at page 216, you write that before the Britishers came, no one was landless in Punjab. I think this needs to be thoroughly examined, because what British did was that whatever they understood, whether they properly understood or not, the agrarian kind of situation, there were some kind people who are cultivating the land. The land was in their possession, and there were others who were not having land under their possession, and they were in the subordinate position. So that aspect we need to examine, because for earlier period, we don't have a written kind of a report and some kind of settlement kind of report which the British were able to produce. So this aspect is something which requires examination to relate it to the Ranjit Singh period or earlier period with the British period. So this is something which we need to understand. Secondly, one thing which has intrigued me is that in spite of Land Alienation Act of 1901, those who are supposed to be benefited, they raised a big agitation in 1907. And this agitation was again on the three laws. One was the Land Alienation Act. This was one of the point. Second was Colonization of Government Land Bill 1906. And third was the Water Bill Act 1907. Okay. So if the British rule was so benevolent, why the peasantry and also other classes rose in revolt against this kind of situation? And you need to integrate with your analysis the kind of peasant movement which came up at that time. Third thing which I will like to bring to your kind notice is that since in the earlier period there was no mechanism of collecting periodic data about the land relations, so this situation came up in the post-independence period. So NSSO data related to 53, 54, both about PEPSU and Punjab region makes available to us how much land was under tenancy, what kind of tenancy it was. So if you try to relate it to earlier period, what they try to create was in terms of strengthening the peasantry. It led to concentration of land in a few hands and a kind of tenancy which was based on largely Bhai system, where sometimes 1/3 or 50% of the produce was taken away by the landlord, the landowners, and the tenant was given very small percentage of that. And large number of tenants were not the scheduled caste, they were what you call the cultivating caste people. So what it led to ultimately was towards some kind of consolidation of land relations, which you can find in real sense existed in the European countries. So it is through land reform process that that kind of things and the green revolution technology ultimately break down that kind of things. I think these issues need further investigations, and your book should be able to provoke a large number of young scholars to work in this area. And this is a very fertile area where we are able to look into and reinterpret various kinds of things and relate it to the present context of what kind of society we want to build. Because the present farmers movement, as Atul Sood pointed out, it's very much concerned with the land owning categories of the people. They are not concerned about how to make the other sections of the rural society as partners in the development process. So that kind of consciousness is lacking, and it was lacking in the earlier period also. That's why 30%, 33% of the scheduled caste population hardly own 4% of the land in Punjab. So with these remarks, I would like to thank the two panelists, Atul Sood and Karamjit Kaur, and to Navyug, I would like to thank you very much for standing with us, because I know that what time is there. It's the early morning where you are located, and here people are sitting at noon and they must be waiting for their lunch. So thank you very much for making a good contribution, academic contribution, and interacting with all of us. Thank you very much. Over to Mahinder Singh.
Thank you very much. Now, before I request our honorary trainer, Sir Sodi, to propose a vote of thanks, I have a small comment to make. While making small welcome, I said this is a book with a difference. I think you agree this is a book with a difference. But I like to add, this was a panel also with a difference. And getting a hint from Professor Sood, I think we should organize one day's sort of full function on this book, also inviting Niladri, and time and again, our young friend has expressed his wish to come to Punjab. Navyug, you are welcome to Punjab, and also wish and pray Sucha Singh Gill also come. This coincides, and these four people who have one full day. One second comment is, Bharat, time and again, this talk of empowerment of peasantry, empowerment of Dalits. Young friends may not know a great general called Banda Singh Bahadur. It was he who introduced peasant proprietor. Land, who is the owner of land? God himself. I mean, it's not my land. The one who cultivates is the owner. After that, I mean, in Punjab, I'm a student of Punjab history. Our tragedy was that of leadership. We had one good leader, Pratap Singh Kaur, who had seen the farms in California. And after that, there is series. I mean, feudals are back, whether it's Badal feudal or Captain feudal. There's one exception, Gyani Jail Singh. He introduced communal tone in Punjab politics. I'm sorry, he was no better. So answer is, कोई किसी को राज न दे हैं, जो ले हैं निज बल से ले हैं. Dalits, they're 35%, 34%. What happens? Dalit becomes the chief minister of UP. What is he doing? What has he done for the Dalits? Build our own empire. So, I mean, I get a little emotional. So, unless we organize ourselves and fight for our rights, same with the case of women. I mean, time and again, women are ignored. Why they are ignored? They need to empower themselves. So now I think I should stop at this stage. Now, next time we are having a very good sort of book discussion, again from a scholar from US, Gurminder Kaur Pagal, Sikh Kirtan and his journey. I feel a little jealous and bad. All bright scholars have moved to Canada or US, isn't it? Now we need to think of a reverse migration. So she is talking about how the ragas evolved, how the instruments evolved. So this will be a function with the different demonstration and discussion. That is on 18th in the evening, pleasant time, 5 p.m. to 7 or 8, and then followed by snacks. May I now request Sir Sodi to propose a formal vote of thanks, and after that, young friends join us for lunch.
On behalf of BVSSS Sadan, led by very renowned historian Dr. Mohinder Singh Ji, and an outstanding economist, Dr. Jaswinder Singh Ji, and myself. I thank the panelists who has presented this, their pearls of wisdom in a most simplified and interesting manner. We can all see the interest you all have taken in this lecture. There are so many questions and so many answers. I'm so overwhelmed. I think this will all motivate you to go research in this field and write similar books. Further, I feel having spent more than 15-20 years of my life in village, the major problem now I find is the agriculture has no more remained economical, profitable. We were having 25 acres of land. Now after division, it has come down to 1 or 2 acres. It's not economical now. No mechanized farming can be done on that. Plus the cost of farming is increasing in such a way that the MSP is not matching it. So people are leaving farming and shifting to other modes of employment. GDP, our share in GDP, of agriculture share in GDP is decreasing day by day. We used to more than 60-70% people were dependent on agriculture. Now less and less people are going in agriculture. Now I think the corporatization of farming is going on. The culture for that has come. That is already in Canada and other European countries. I think that will come in India also, and in particular Punjab also. Thank you so much. All the very best.
Yes, friends. For lunch.
Please join us for lunch in the adjoining hall.
Next hall.
Thank you, Professor Gill and Professor Navyug Gill for joining us.
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया धन्यवाद
नहीं ਤੁਹਾਡਾ
It was a very, very general